The news has played a significant impact in raising attention to this overt racism that occurs daily. And we really want to unpack the role that the news has in the public opinion and public awareness to these challenges. But before we go too far, I did want to put a shameless plug in for our Black Like Me podcast, where it just launched today, if I'm not mistaken, where Dr. G really he took the time to reflect on, what he's heard. What he's heard about George Floyd's death, the impact it's had on him, but also how the trajectory of the nation has changed over the past year. And what I love is he actually shares 5 steps to have hope about where we can move after understanding this point in our racial justice history. Strongly recommend you download, you listen to it, you subscribe to the Black Like Me podcast, but also share it with your family and friends. Make sure that you share this out because there's a lot of people that need to hear this message. And so wanted to just stop and recognize the impact and really the weight of today being the 1 year anniversary. And I'd also be remiss to not call out the fact that June 1st, so just a few days away, will actually be the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. So again, as we talk about, it's critical that we understand the history of these events, understand how it impacts us today, and also moving into the future. And so now that we've actually been doing this series for about a year, we wanted to just stop and understand what you to attend one or more of these Lean into Allyship events. So again, we've been doing this for a year. So whether this is your first event, you've attended every monthly event, what's either had you, what was the catalyst for you attending or continuing to come back? And so we're going to ask actually that you enter that information into the Q&A box so that we can receive that on the back end, so we can understand what's adding value to you, why you came, and how we can help mobilize you moving forward. And so I'm not going to read through all those answers, but I just want to give you a minute to enter into the Q&A what brought you here either tonight or thus far to a previous Lean into Allyship event. And actually, while you're entering that, there's a few that are already coming in. So someone's wife encouraged him. That's great. Just keep learning and doing better. Growth and allyship. Do as much as my schedule and finances allow. So it sounds like, now all of them are coming in. So what I'm seeing already as a quick theme is how to be a better ally, both in your personal and professional life. I see a lot of that coming in. And so I think that's fantastic. And that is actually the entire intent of why this series was set up. And so we're glad to hear that. As keep typing, because we'll save all of this and make sure that we will, again, use that to inform future events. But for those who it's your first time tonight, we want to make sure and we will at every event, to strongly consider donating to Nehemiah. We cannot and do not expect them to support these events and to educate for free. And I would say too, look into see if there's wherever you work, to see if there's a company match, because again, that can maximize the impact of your dollar going to Nehemiah and what they can do with that financial help. So just a few logistics, then we're going to get started. So we have turned off the chat functionality, which is why we had you enter into the Q&A tonight. And what you're going to see is the chat will be used by Eli from Nehemiah to be sharing valuable resources throughout this event. But I'm going to ask that you don't try to write all those resources down. Just soak it in, be present, and we will send out all of those resources in a follow-up email. So what we want you to use the Q&A for is we want you to drive the second half of this discussion and really ask the questions that come up as Dr. G and Neil have a conversation and listening into that. Because we will send a recording of the event. Again, all of the resources at the end, as well as all previous events that have been recorded. You'll see that on Justified Anger's YouTube page. So tonight, we're going to have about 40 minutes, 35 to 40 minutes with Dr. G and Neil Heinen talking through some of Neil's experiences. And then we're going to have 15 minutes of Q&A. So please, throughout, don't wait until halfway through the event to start entering your questions. Enter them throughout. We'll wrap that up. Then after kind of a quick Q&A, having Rebecca Compton Allen, also known as RCA, share some additional volunteer and educational opportunities coming up before we wrap up with an Ally in Action challenge. And so with that, I want to just make sure I can introduce Dr. G, and you know who they both are. Again, if it's your first time, Dr. G is the president, the founder and the vision for the nonprofit Nehemiah Center for Urban Leadership Development. And the vision for this organization is to engage the greater Madison community to empower African American individuals, families, and communities to bring about hope, transformation, and justice. And so Dr. G's been in this space for 35 years. He has experience serving leaders, being an advisor to leaders all across the world. And a lot of his efforts have been also educating, coaching, and mobilizing white allies, which is exactly why he's here tonight. And Neil is the former editorial director for WISC TV. And he was actually one of the last standing in a field that once numbered into the hundreds in doing a little bit of research. And so I know you also was a previous editor director at the Madison Magazine, which shares ownership with WISC. And what I love in looking up some information is that you're an unapologetic cheerleader for local business and civic involvement. And I look forward to that. And you've also hosted the Sunday morning news for the record for the past 30 years. And so want to welcome you both to this event. And I will turn over to you, Dr. G, I know you have some questions lined up that you wanted to talk with Neil about.
Definitely. Dan, thank you so much. You and Samantha and the full team. I hate when I start naming folks and Lauren from Generator and my team, RCA and Eli. I just really appreciate all the effort that you put into creating this space so that we can talk with people who want to know how to continue this discussion about not just about race, but where we go from here. So this is entitled Lean into Allyship. And so we realize that you don't just fall into it. It's not something that's automatic, but you got to lean into it. And that means you've got to be intrigued and sort of lean forward. I gave a talk today at American Family Insurance, and I was giving them pointers on how do you engage in inclusive excellence. And I used a quote that my sister taught me from a conference that she went to. It was the conference from social workers. And the presenter said, whenever you're talking with someone and they begin to talk about their story and you have no idea what they're talking about, you can't relate, it might be frustrating or fearful or off-putting. The trainer said, lean in, because your body language of going, ugh, can discourage communication. And communicating is really how we move ahead in unity and togetherness. When we're not leaning, we're probably not talking. And when we're talking, we're not relating. And when we're not relating, we're not doing anything positive together. So this is really about how we lean in to this. My friend Neil Heinen is my special guest. Neil is really an institution here in Madison, and I love the fact that Dan gave him a good introduction. But I also found that he gave his first editorial. He debuted with his editorials in 1992, and he's done more than 7,400 TV editorials, and he hosted 1,500 episodes of the Sunday morning public affairs show For the Record. I sat on the sofa with him a few times as that was happening. Tom Keeler, who was at the time the WISC TV vice president and general manager, he said to declare Neil Heinen as a Madison institution is an understatement, and his impact and legacy will last forever. And so I appreciate the fact that this gentleman is still in the community. We're working together on some exciting things together. And so in the future, we might come back and talk a little bit about that. But Neil, man, it is so nice to have you sitting on my sofa, so to speak. Welcome to Lean into Allyship, man. It's so great to have you here.
The dynamic feels a little different, Alex, than what you and I are used to. As I said, if I start asking questions, just cut me off here. All right, this is good go.
I know if you ask some, man, they'll be really good. So just a couple of general things. What made you really want to enter into the media world, journalism, as a career?
Yeah. It was a number of things, including just some difficulty really knowing what it was I wanted to do and where it was that I could make a contribution. I had sort of a strange, long, winding path into journalism. I graduated from high school in 1969, and I graduated from the University of Wisconsin in 1982. And in those ensuing 13 years, I would go to school on and off, and through a variety of really lucky events. I had some people in my life who sort of directed me into journalism for a variety of reasons. And it was my love of writing that sort of was the aha moment, that the path from Woodward and Bernstein to to making a contribution, to maybe doing something valuable in my life, it all seemed to coalesce around journalism. And I feel very grateful and lucky that's where it ended up.
Man, well, I'm glad that it directed you here to our community. You talk about just an array of things, and so I appreciate your willingness to talk with me just about the connection or the role of media in society and how it has really impacted the Black community. You've been around, for as long as I've been in public arenas. We probably overlapped at UW-Madison about the same time, so you probably can remember some of the meetings in the early '80s and late '80s and '90s when the Black community community leaders would meet with leaders in the media and say, we need more positive stories about Black people. We need just to stop, reporting people and Black people in negative things. When someone does something, rob a bank, they just say a male, 5'8", medium build, but when they're Black, a Black male, 5'8", medium build. And so the media has evolved a bit because I think you all listen to some of those things. As you look back now and you see some of the issues that we're wrestling with in society, and I'll get to some of the specifics, do you think the media responded quickly enough, adjusted quickly enough back when we were having some of those initial discussions, or did it just do the best it could with what it knew to do and what it had back in some of those days?
I think we thought we were responding quickly enough at the time. A lot of times it's in hindsight that we realize how short-sighted we were, how self-satisfied we were at the time. But I've been, the trajectory, Alex, for me goes back even to the 60s and maybe even a little before that when I was delivering the Milwaukee Sentinel as an 8-year-old in Milwaukee, and even then beginning to appreciate the power of the media in that time in newspapers, but also the 3 network television stations, and just the media landscape was so dramatically different. And watching its arc from then to now, with the pivotal point for this conversation being a year ago. I think 20, 30 years ago, we were doing a terrible job of reporting on issues inclusively, with an appropriate diversity of viewpoints, but sources and images. It was for many, many decades a very white-centric industry, and broadcast and print media. So no, it's not something to be particularly proud of. Although there were times in the last 50 years when journalism did, I think, rise to the occasion. It never went far enough. At best, it was a series of steps that we were able to build on. But some of the reporting around civil rights in the 60s, around poverty and the urban-rural divide, some of the work that that was going on in the Kennedy administration and the Johnson administration, the media was reporting on those issues in ways that it hadn't before. And as we know, the public was not always particularly receptive to those issues. It was a struggle. There was tension. There was criticism of the media in a lot of ways. But I think really the history is very much ebb and flow and up and down to bring us to where we are today.
You're part of thank you for that honest response, Neil. I really appreciate that. You've worked in media at an interesting juncture where you certainly have been trained by more the traditionalists and in print journalism, in broadcast journalism, and then you've watched the advent of social media. I've posted things and have gotten a call from news outlets saying, "Hey, we want to know more about your event," or "You posted something about a documentary on Twitter, and we'd love to know, can we come? Can we capture some things of it?" So it's interesting to me that it seems like we used to pursue media to talk about what's happening in the community, but it's like media has one eye on social media and understanding what the pulse of the community is. Some folks have not liked that. My friend Greg Jeske, who worked with me on my Justified Anger Journey documentary, didn't like the part of just like really just watching social media. That didn't feel like the kind of media he had been trained to. But I would imagine that's an interesting adjustment to watch something develop on our watch as adults, like social media, Facebook, and now it's sort of shaping storytelling of news. Did you find that to be odd or a difficult bridge to make?
Yes, both odd and difficult, but extraordinarily important. I mean, I do think that tonight, Alex, we will make the case that this past year has been, one of the most pivotal changes in American journalism in my lifetime, and particularly in its relationship to issues of race and culture and all of the social justice issues connected to it. And that is reflective of the environment, the political and cultural environment that we live in, and the technology.
Definitely
changed journalism forever. I mean, this is a media landscape that none of us envisioned when we started talking about these issues 20, 30, 40 years ago. For me, when newsrooms started looking at themselves and saying, we're not as diverse as we need to be. And I don't know how many people realize that those conversations have been going on for decades. And I don't blame them for not realizing it, because there was little to no change. But there was this internal churn of, we know we need to do better. How are we going to do that? Where are we going to find candidates? That whole, that just constant spin that was counterproductive. That has been going on for a long time. Things have changed dramatically in 12 months. And that is also the influence of the new media landscape, of social media, of the diversity of publications and cable and broadcast, and the whole shebang.
All of that influenced it. Well, then that's actually a great launching point into where I really would love to go with this discussion, Neil. As Dan teed us up, we talked about that it was a year ago that George Floyd was murdered. First of all, it's hard for me to believe that happened. Secondly, I've yet to watch the video, just because of everything else that was happening with the pandemic, being in rooms with medical professionals explaining the need for folks with pre-existing issues, Black and brown people particularly, to still be considered for ventilation access. Like, I was in rooms really begging for Black and brown lives. So when the situation happened with George Floyd, when he was murdered, I felt like it took me over the top, and I felt that I could, and I have a strong stomach. I can watch, I can take my bit of gore and blood, but when I heard that he called out for his mom, as a 57-year-old mama's boy, where he must have been, what he was trying to say in that, a grown Black man a grown person, but a Black man crying out for his mother, just touched me in a really, really deep place. But then I watched, again, the proliferation of the Black Lives Matter movement. People in Syria and other places around the world had images of George Floyd. My friends in Zimbabwe wanted to know what is going on in America. My friends in Singapore, what is going on in America? My friends in Hong Kong were asking about a history class because they said, what is America doing to Black people? Is this new? It doesn't seem like it's new. What's going on? So I guess one of the questions I'd like to ask you is America more woke? And so that it helped media to tell the story more broadly? Did media help America to be more woke or think it's more woke? I would just love to hear what seems to have been a quantum leap in the media's attention that it gave to George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and other individuals that I don't think the Rodney King case got. As much as we talked about Trayvon Martin, I don't think it got the same kind of Tamir Rice, James, Mr. Garner. A lot of these things were going on, and we talked about it a lot. But I remember we stopped looking at death counts from COVID to watch what was happening in Minneapolis. And so I guess I'd love to know your take. Did the media make this large step because it realized we've not done right by the Black community, therefore we've not done right by our viewers, or was it just about numbers and viewers? How do you interpret the way that event gripped the hearts of Americans, caused people to connect the dots between that incident and COVID? People put it together in a way that I just started seeing people say, I need to do something. I've been oblivious. I'm sorry. I'm embarrassed. I've got to be a part of the change. I've never heard it at that level. And I'm 57. I've been in this work for 30 plus years. And I've never heard that level of the articulation of anguish of race relations by white folks. So I'm just curious how you, as a retired journalist, as a male who's white, read how all of that happened to help America and the world to become more knowledgeable about these real issues.
Well, first of all, I don't know how you've avoided seeing the video, that's probably a different issue, but that's something that I think we need to think about when we think about the influence of the media in these issues, is the use of those images, the repetition of those images, the choice of what images to use and emphasize over others. That's a real legitimate conversation.
Sure.
But there was something about that. I mean, we know that the video itself probably played a more pivotal role in the legal follow-up to that case, to the actual
Sure.
conviction of that white cop of murder than had in previous cases. There was something about it that just that just emphasized the extraordinary nature of this, and probably caused some reflection back on Trayvon Martin and some of the other cases. Just what did we miss there? Although I'm hesitant to give too much credit there, because I think the initial response, even to George Floyd, was on the part of white people, not again, another one. Well, we've said that over and over and over. Oh, not again. Oh, another one. How much more of this? This, I think, combined with the pandemic, with, I think, even then, sort of the early awareness of the inequity of the impact of the pandemic. Right. I think to some extent, Alex, the role that the pandemic played in news coverage in general. I've thought about this a little bit. A year and a half ago, or a little more than a year ago, all of a sudden, coverage of sporting events stopped. Entertainment events stopped. There were no restaurant reviews. There was no coverage of big gatherings. The news became very focused on the pandemic, and because of George Floyd, social justice and injustice. And so you had a lot more attention being paid to those particular stories and those particular influences in civic life and in this country and in democracy. So I think that the media, its focus was very much sharpened. And the Floyd case became a much bigger story, to use a journalism cliche, than it might have otherwise. And that just was, that grew very, very quickly. It grew into a national conversation about issues that have been festering for 20, 30 years, 40 years. 40 years, 50 years. I mean, they were brought back. They were brought back into the conversation and served as again more momentum to actually make some change. And so you saw fairly quickly an institution like the New York Times devoting entire sections of the paper to not just the Floyd case, but to the whole history of police treatment of Black men, and then by extension to the racial divide in this country, and then exacerbated by the inequities of the pandemic. And it built on itself into, what you have so eloquently described as the moment that we're in right now. I think the moment is a reflection of those component parts that were built into that. And I don't have an exact timeline. I think there are probably people studying this that will be very helpful to us as we move forward, who are going to be able to look at it month by month. But just, anecdotally, I don't think it was very long thereafter that we began to see Black Americans in roles that we had never seen them before.
That's true.
In popular culture, in news coverage, as sources, as as featured people in stories, and it was in areas that traditionally people of color had not been included as sources. In the book review, in the business pages, on the front page, and all of those sections. In advertising on television, I trace the number of faces of color, the diversity,
definitely,
in race, culture, of sexual orientation, all of those elements. I mean, that grew a year ago from then till now in a way that I don't ever remember it growing before.
Oh man, I agree. And do you think that it's happened in a way that it's creating a new normal? I know we're all crossing our fingers. People of color, Black people with bated breath are saying, I hope this doesn't slide backwards into the same old. Do you think that the momentum of everything has pushed it in a way that it's too difficult to go back to sweeping the issues under the rug, not really talking about them, that all of this has pushed us and pushed the envelope to a new place where this feels like it's going to be the new normal for how we see what we see in advertisement or the kinds of stories that are covered by mainstream news outlets?
God, I want to believe that's so bad, Alex. I mean,
I do too, Neil.
I have to believe that that's true. But I'm a white boomer. I thought the 60s had changed things forever.
Right.
I thought that the things that we fought for and marched for and enjoyed in the 60s, the inclusion, the changes were with us forever, and they weren't. I mean, it was a terrible miscalculation. I would hate to think that we would make that mistake again. And I do think that it's not going to be all at the same pace. I think advertising has probably changed forever. I don't think we will ever again see products marketed, causes promoted that don't have faces of color, commensurate with the population, if not more than that. And from just a crass capitalist point of view, I mean, the country is not ever going to be majority white again. I mean, that
ship has sailed.
That time's over, and it is only going to be increasingly diverse and of color. And I think all smart business people have to realize that and recognize that. I think that in media, in traditional media, in news media, that progress could be a little bit slower, just because I think we, the media, are still struggling with recruiting, training, thinking differently about how we get more diverse influences into our newsrooms, into our pages,
and to stay here.
and to stay here. I mean, we've used this excuse forever that it's so hard to find journalists of color, Black journalists in journalism schools, and so how can we hire them if they're not graduating from the journalism? I mean, none of us were thinking, how can we bring people in and teach them and train them ourselves, and and show them opportunities to do this? And I think that is beginning to change a little bit now. For a long time, and I think this was an important opportunity for us that we looked at and missed. The whole civic journalism movement of 25 years ago was supposed to be a response to the lack of diversity in voices. And a lot of that was the lack of political diversity, but it was cultural and racial diversity as well. We made some progress and then we slipped back. Now, today, 1 year after George Floyd, I'm seeing more and more people of color being included as the voices on the air, the people who are actually talking about these issues, not being asked about them, but are asking the questions about them, that are playing the role of journalists. It's one of the reasons that, I was pretty excited, to retire at this time, because I think that my company is very much committed to replacing my voice with more diverse voices, and to get a broader range of experience and perspective than what I was able to offer, even having friends like you.
That's great. That's really great. Neil, last time we had leaned into allyship, the Honorable Everett Mitchell was on, and he knew that I was involved with Dr. Christy Clark-Pujara in training district judiciaries around the state of Wisconsin. Judges need continuing education, just like educators and others. And we've been fortunate enough that they've reached out to us and said, we want to understand our blind spots as it pertains to racial equity and judicial justice. And he said during the interview, gee, remember, there's something that's called judicial discretion. I said, well, I've never heard of that. He says, judges get, they have to uphold the law. That's their job. But they do have discretion where they can think of community actions or other things so that people can really redeem themselves. Is there discretion in media? And would the preponderance, or at least the presence, if not preponderance, of more Black and brown, Asian American folks, other ethnic minorities representation, how does discretion play out in media if and when we get more Black and brown people that are who hold editorial spaces like you do? Like, what would that look like, or what could that look like?
Yeah, there's absolutely discretion. The dynamic in a newsroom, and I'm going to say this about all newsrooms, I mean, to various degrees, but in general, the dynamic in a newsroom is a constant flow of information, of questioning, of asking, are we getting the news? Are we getting the story? Are we telling the story accurately and well? Are we responding to what our viewers and readers are looking for from us? Layering on that our own judgment about what is news, and with a various amount of training. That said, all of that has been through a mainly white lens. Now, by adding more people of color into our workplaces, and in all different in all different roles. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence, Alex, that in the last year we have a Black executive at a television station for the first time in Madison's history.
You're right.
And
I've
we
had a
now,
chance to meet him, and I'm so glad he's here.
well, and now we have a Black-owned television station, right?
Right.
Byron Allen has bought WKOW. I mean,
Exactly.
this
Something's happening.
this has got to be, just this is now a sustainable change. So with that said, yes, the dynamic is going to be very much changed by having more voices from people of color saying, hold it. I mean, have you thought about this? Have you seen how you were thinking about portraying this? And it will change things.
I love it. Neil, let me ask you one more question before we open things to the floor. I'm really enjoying this, and I'm enjoying your perspective. When I started telling my story about justified anger, you're one of the first media professionals who reached out to me and said, Alex, I want you to come and talk. I think it was about my experience at a downtown service club event. I remember us talking about it. On my podcast, I just had Ms. Craighead, who is running for the Virginia House of Delegates because she outed 2 police officers who were at her Juneteenth rally last year, but she noticed them in the pictures from the insurrection on January 6th. She's being called the Hellraiser because she's saying, wait a minute, you all were here at my event, but you're breaking into the state capitol. And she wasn't judge and jury. She just shared pictures on Facebook, but she's getting hate mail, threats and everything, because when people of color say, ouch, we're the Hellraisers. So I'm curious, with all the attention that mainstream media has been given to the issues of justice and what's happened to Black people and what's not happened for Black people, do you worry about pushback of white fragility and frustration because they feel that white media outlets or majority run media outlets have been somehow overtaken by the cause of causing strife, because now you're showing stories of things happening to Black people over and over and over again? Do you fear pushback within large segments of the white community? And I don't even mean like the extremists that we always kind of think about, maybe even more to the middle. Do you worry as a white male about the pushback of other white men and other white influencers with the attention and the movement that you're seeing in people of color right now because of media attention?
I do, Alex, but because I think this is the moment. I think what we're witnessing is, to some degree, the last stand of white majority who are fighting now tooth and nail to hold on to their power, to hold on to their privilege, to hold on to their comfort, because they see it changing. They know that it's coming, and it's poisoned by politics. I mean, politics is such a divisive element right now that fuels a lot of this discontent that I think we would be better able to deal with as a civil society without the politics of the moment. I do worry about it just because it feels it feels like potentially so disruptive, so angry, so mean-spirited, all of the stuff that we've been experiencing lately. However, I do think that there are new coalitions, there are new allies that there have not been before, that are going to get us through this. I mean, those of us who are really, truly committed to it are going to get past this. We're going to have to deal with the pushback. We're going to have to deal with the anger and the fear and the resentment. But we will. I think it's inevitable.
I like that, Neil. I like that, and that helps to give me hope. And that's why we have events like this, because there are people who have never been invited into the space. You've had the fortune of knowing a lot of the Black influencers. And even as they were emerging, I mean, you and I have known each other for 3 decades. You've known me since I was in my 20s. And so you've helped to capture voices of emerging people, of established folks. And so you've been able to build personal relationships with them. There are a lot of folks in here who don't know how to do that, and where do you begin, and who do you connect with? And so your wisdom and the fact that you stuck to this and that you've built personal relationships from your professional perspective and professional perch, I think has been really, really important. I don't want to hog up all your time. I know that Dan and others are paying attention to questions in the chat room. So so Dan, Samantha, whoever is helping out from here, I'm going to just step back and let our audience begin to ask questions.
Yeah, we'll answer it together.
Great. This is great, Neil.
Excellent. Yes. Thank you both so much for that awesome dynamic conversation, Neil and Dr. G. We have so much left that we'd love to unpack even further, right? So with our remaining time, let's dig in a little bit deeper and get into our Q&A. As a reminder to all of our attendees, this is your hour and we want to hear from you. So please share the questions that are on your minds and in your hearts into the Q&A, and we will work through them here in the time that we have left together. Our first question will revisit a piece of the dialogue that you've already touched on a bit earlier in the conversation, and really applies to both of you. So as media continues to expose and circulate racial injustice caught on camera, how does storytelling balance between informational and impactful before tipping to an insensitive and even desensitizing hyper-focus on Black trauma and graphic violence? Hoping that you can talk about the media's responsibility to protect and respect the emotional health of BIPOC viewers, and the importance of trigger warnings and other approaches when socializing graphic suffering.
Yeah, and I don't, it's easy to get caught in the weeds of media and the behind the scenes stuff of media, and I don't know if that's helpful or not. One of the things that we are contending with, and particularly as a local television station, is just how much news there is every day, just the hours and hours of news, and we keep adding more. And so it's always a bit of a balance to understand and to respond to, people are not watching news in the morning, noon, 5, 6, and 10. We can't show a story once and just assume that everybody's going to see it, although it's available now online and through other avenues. But it's that constant balance of how do we give people what they come to us to find? When is it time to broaden that story and move from what may be just an inherently sensationalist aspect of it to begin with, but then begs for more context and description later on? When is the time to move on to that? When do we risk losing people who say, well, no, I came to see that video because I haven't seen it and I want to see it. And if I don't see it on your station, I'm going to switch to the station that will show it to me. So those are conversations that go on in newsrooms all the time, before every newscast. Do we want to show this video again? And there are, more often than I think a lot of people would think, decisions made to not show that video again. Someone with a different perspective will say, I don't think that that's appropriate, or I think we've done that enough, or we will hear from someone. And and sometimes I'm sorry to say it's inadvertent. We will show something and not think that it is insensitive in a way that it is. We just don't recognize it. We don't see it. And then someone will call and point that out to us. And then it's how do we respond? So I think we are responsive. I think we can be responsive. But I think it will always be difficult to hit that perfect sweet spot where you do it just enough, never too much. What do you think, Alex?
I think you hit it head on. I agree. I could elaborate, but I would love for more people to ask you more questions. So I would just say I'm in agreement.
Excellent.
So, And one of the questions, and Dr. G, you spoke to this at the very onset of this discussion. So I want to revisit, you had mentioned about, the positive showcasing of Black excellence as well. And so the question that actually John submitted before the event is just kind of a broad question about what do you think about local media? But the context was, and a lot of this conversation is focused on covering police reports or stories, but rarely show Black successful businesses or families doing great things in the community. A lot of this, again, is being focused on exposing awareness, but very little is done to educate and change perceptions, or this has the ability, I should say, to educate and change perceptions and break down barriers if we focus on some of the positive stories. So want to get one or both of your perspectives on the inverse side of why or how can we showcase more of that positive coverage as well?
I would just say, just briefly, I'm not sure if the media does what used to be called human interest stories broadly on its white residents. So I'm not sure if just in general we see enough of that. I just feel like news has shifted a lot, probably like in the 70s or 80s when Turner Broadcast went 24 hours and we said, oh my gosh, I can't believe the news is going to be on for 24 hours. I still remember, Dan, when TV used to go off. That's before your time. You and Samantha know nothing about that, but I remember when television used to go off. And so certainly when it comes to Black folks, we would love to see more of those positive stories. We work deeply in the reentry world. If someone who's on paper does something wrong, it's all over the news. But I can name you scores of women and men who have done everything that the states wanted them to do to get their lives back. They bought homes, they've sent their kids to college, and you never hear those stories. You don't hear those. You just hear, a person on probation was caught. And so I think gore sells, and I'm not sure if people are really tuning into the news to hear a nice, fluffy story, but I think we need more of them, particularly with people of color. People need to see that we're not just recovering from something or just living a disenfranchised reality. I think there needs to be more coverage of the positive human interest stories.
It's been a constant in my 40 years in the business that readers want some positive news. They do. They tell us that all the time. It is a professional balance of how much, when, how to do it. But I think that this last year plus has been an unusual time. I don't think that we can really use the year of COVID as an example of news decision making. But in the year right before that, and in the year before that, just as an example, at my company, we had an anchor, Charlotte Deleste, who had a franchise called Doing Something Good. And once a week, she would tell a story of a person, of an organization, of something positive going on in a community. It was extremely popular, and it generated a lot of interest and a lot of suggestions. But there are different definitions of that too, and I think we have to be careful not to fall into the trap of popular culture doing good kind of stuff when there are a lot of opportunities to look at what makes communities function well, what makes them work. I mean, and you have got businesses doing extraordinary things, both to the benefit of their customers, but also to the benefit of their employees. You've got a robust nonprofit sector that is working tirelessly, and those stories, they show up. They don't always show up under the banner of doing something good. They might be reflected in response to a situation that wasn't so positive to begin with, but they show citizens acting in behalf of other citizens. And I see it in the newspapers too, and I see it in the Cap Times and other papers that there's still interest in those stories. Sometimes you have to convince young reporters that there's value in doing them, and that's a whole different issue. Again, sort of inside baseball as we look at who is the media today and how do we interest people and make them knowledgeable about their communities.
That's good.
Excellent. Thank you, Neil. We have another question for you, Neil, from Steve, and he asks, in a segregated society, how can journalists frame their reporting in ways that speak to audiences with very different lived experiences?
Well, first of all, it is a matter of who you talk to and who you choose to ask for information and for help, and to include that information in your story. People have to see a diverse range of sources and viewpoints in the stories that you're doing. Second of all, this is a constant battle. We have to get away from the idea of fairness being two sides of a story. This is becoming a little more discussed in the media world. I mean, it used to be a hard thing to talk about, but if you talk to someone for a story, then you're trained to go get the other side of the story so that it is fair, so that as we all know, there are not two sides to any story. There's 30 sides, there's 50 sides. And the more of those sides that you can include and have reflected in your work, the better. But that requires attention. That requires thoughtful, ideas about how a story is put together, how a story is told and then followed up on. How many stories does it require to accurately, get across something that is really influencing people's lives? There are ways to do it, and I think we're being forced into it. And again, we will keep coming back to the need for more diversity in the newsroom, in the building, to make sure that we are all thinking about how many sides of a story are appropriate.
Thank you for that, Neil. And I know we are coming up on time. We do want to end kind of pretty much right at 8. So this will be the last question before we jump to RCA. This hour always flies by.
Yeah.
But Don asked a question about, again, the media is good at covering events and specific occurrences, which leads to a lot of this outcry that we've been talking about, right? And angst and things like that. But what are the opportunities for media to play a larger part in understanding and creating? Because what we always want to bring this back to is the systemic change that we're trying to drive. And what's the role, do you feel, Neil, of the media to drive that beyond just sharing the story?
Well, I mean, I don't want to overemphasize it, but it's a controversial topic, Dan. I mean, this is something that is hard for journalists to talk about. And I have to say that I look at it through the lens primarily of an opinion journalist. So I had some fewer constraints than a lot of the reporters and editors and anchors that we tend to think of as media. And I mean, I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of opinion journalism and its place in what is the new American journalism. The new American journalism today. Now I just lost my train of thought. Remind me of Don's question again.
So the bigger question kind of at the end is just really, what are the opportunities for media to play a larger part in our understandings and creating that change? And I want to bring it back to systemic change.
No wonder I forgot it. It's one of those questions that's very, very hard. At Kettering, we ask this fundamental question of journalists: do you see yourselves within the community or outside the community? There's no right or wrong answer to that, but I think it's an extraordinarily important question that journalists have to ask themselves. As I'm doing my reporting, am I this dispassionate observer who only asks the questions that I think I should be asking and report the answers as they're given to me? Or do I recognize that I bring my own emotions, values to a story like this, and I'm going to ask questions that may expose those I'm not going to let them influence, what I put on the air, but I bring them to my interviews. I bring them to my interest, my desire to tell the story fully and accurately. I want to give my source the opportunity to really go into some detail and maybe, give me some context that I hadn't thought of before. And that requires, I think, a certain willingness to say, this is important to me too. This is a role that is extremely important, but it is part of the fundamental citizens, communities, and institutions working collaboratively that makes a democracy function. And that's a worthy conversation to have. It's not some conversation that we should just allow to be ended by saying, no, this is what journalists do. They don't do anything else. And that's it. And we should be satisfied with that. We're in a world now that I think where a little bit of comfort with ambiguity is a good thing. And I think we should embrace that.
Awesome. Thank you. So with that, and again, thank you so much for your time and sharing those insights. And so with that, Samantha, do you want to hand it over to RCA?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. We are so excited for RCA, the Director of Mobilization at Nehemiah, to join us now for a highlight of upcoming excellent and impactful educational and volunteer offerings. Thanks, RCA.
Thank you so much. I'm always excited to talk to this audience about the 3 pillars: educate, donate, and affiliate. For education, we're talking about being in the know. There are ways for you to stay up to date with what's going on at Nehemiah, and some of those ways are subscribing to our newsletter, finding upcoming events on our calendar, and following Nehemiah and Justified Anger on social media. And I wanted to draw special attention to the third Thursday of each month, when some of our really favored offerings are for free at noon and 6:30 p.m. At noon, we have the reentry lunch and learns, and at 6:30 p.m. we have White and Wondering, and we'll give you a little more detail on what those events are. White and Wondering is a space for people to get together and talk about just the struggles that come along with allyship. So, if you are consistently encountering the same kind of situation and you're just not quite sure how to handle it, there are other allies out there who are very likely struggling with the same types of things. And we love to provide this opportunity for you to talk with other allies. Maybe they're not a part of your direct world, but they are sharing experiences with you, and it can feel uplifting and reduce that sense of loneliness and frustration that comes along with managing interactions with racism in real time at a personal, systemic, or institutional level. I'm going to pass it over to Eli to talk about the Reentry Lunch and Learn and a podcast.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. So I just wanted to briefly mention our Reentry Conference virtual lunch and learn sessions that we're doing monthly. So the next one's going to be on June 17th, and we are just covering different topics related to those who have been incarcerated or formerly incarcerated and understanding the criminal justice system. So the next one's going to be on understanding the expungement process. So we usually have a small panel, and they talk with our staff to clarify these different topics. So we hope you join us each month for those. Those are free and online. And then I also want to mention we have some podcast options. New episode of the Justified Anger podcast just came out, and we got to feature the Court Observer group that works with Justified Anger. So we got to tell a really great story about some allies who are advocating for those who are still in jail during COVID, and they were just trying to humanize their appearances in court more. So you definitely want to hear that story and also learn from what those allies are doing on their journey. So check out that podcast as well. And then we mentioned this at the beginning. You don't want to miss hearing what Dr. G has to say more about today's anniversary with George Floyd is very important. But yeah, weekly episodes coming out new where you get to hear more from Dr. G and also about the Black experience and also what white allies are doing to help. So you can find that anywhere that you listen to podcasts.
Thank you, Eli. Going back to the 3 pillars, the next pillar being donate. You can raise funds or gather goods within your sphere of influence to help us achieve our goals. One of our goals right now is to have 1,000 sustained donors supporting the work that we do at Nehemiah. If monetary donations are not the right fit for you, your family, or your sphere of influence, we also strongly encourage you to host a drive for something that is needed in our volunteer bulletin. You can do this through your work, your faith community, a neighborhood, clubs you belong to, any kind of area where you have a sphere of people that you're involved with. And doing those drives for goods is a really great way to support our programming in the allied community and in the south side of Madison as well. And last but not least, the affiliate pillar. So working alongside Nehemiah to achieve our goals. And this is where we're really seeing mobilization of ourselves. We do have a new volunteer onboarding course, and as we're talking about media tonight, and we're talking about how to spread the word about the work that Nehemiah is doing or these issues that are present in our community that maybe not everyone's aware of, it's really important that we use whatever platform we have to share the work of Nehemiah and Justified Anger. So if that's your social media, if that is a work group that you belong to, church group that you belong to, all those things that I listed on the previous slide, anywhere that you have a voice and you have an influence is a way that you can put a megaphone to this work and spread this work further. So thanks so much for listening tonight. I hope you consider educational opportunities, donating, even if it's not money, if it's a drive for goods, and mobilizing yourself and your voice.
Thank you, RCA. And the last thing we wanted to just end on as well is allyship being about a daily and consistent practice. So obviously with today being all about the role that the news plays, what the monthly challenge for you is to really evaluate your news sources from an equitable perspective, making sure we know that finding the reliable news sources is really hard today, right? Because there's an inherent bias in various news sources, but really being clear on what are the news sources you're getting your information from, what could that potential bias be, and how can you be looking at that to what Neil had said to make sure that it's really coming from an inclusive space. It's getting the 30 to 50, the right number of sides to the story so that you're really understanding the full perspective. And so before we wrap up, Dr. G, is there any last words that you have for the audience as well?
I'd like just to ask, those of you that are, the audience, to just take some time today and just pause and ask, how have you changed and have been changed since the events surrounding George Floyd's death a year ago? How do you think about people you see who look differently? How do you think about engaging the causes? What do you feel? What do you think when you hear educate, donate, and affiliate, a call to you to get connected some way? When I interviewed best-selling author Robin DiAngelo, who's the author of the book White Fragility, she said these are actually very frightening times. It's interesting. We've just come out of some very trying time in the last administration. She said, but sometimes during those times you're ready for battle, you realize we need to rally. But when we feel like there's success on the horizon, we seem to relax ourselves and think someone else is going to do it. Dan's going to do it. Samantha, Lauren, and people decide not to connect. And so I want to ask you, are you more committed to the issues of diversity and inclusion, of justice, of equity today than when the harsh realities of what we're now facing first became apparent to you? We need you to stay the course, and we don't need you to wait for the next horrible event to make you re-up on this. You've got to really stoke the fire. You've got to strike while things are hot. You've got to take action. And there are so many opportunities here tonight. But I just want you to ask yourselves, and those who you're close to, Are we different? Are we woke because we talk about things or observe a discussion on Zoom? Are you really taking the actions to make this world a better place for those you love, your children, your grandchildren? We need you to really consider that. And so, Dan, that's what I would say to folks, and to have a safe holiday this weekend. But just really pause and just ask: are you part of the change that we all want for America and the world?
Perfect. Thank you for closing that up, Dr. G. I appreciate it. And just want to stop again and thank you, Dr. G, for being with us for this year, for being willing when when I first reached out, for you to be willing to continue this. Now we're a year into it, but sharing your insights and your leadership with really people from across the country. And so that's, thank you, Neil, for coming tonight, sharing your experiences, your perspectives, and the hope for the future as it relates to the media. And so many people to thank. Thank you, RCA, for, again, the volunteer opportunities, Lauren from the Generator Technology, and of course the planning team, right, and making this happen, as well as AJ for posting things on Facebook Live, and Eli for posting things in chat. So it takes a village to pull these events together. Thank you to everyone. And the last thing is mark your calendars for June 22nd. That is the next Lean Into Allyship event. We are still working on the details and the topic for that event. But again, block your calendars and then look for the follow-up email from Justified Anger that will have the link to this event. It's going to have all of the resources so you can share with your circle of influence. So with that, thank you for attending, and have a good night, everyone.